What would you do if you saw a hungry child standing alone in the cold, eyes fixed on your food but too afraid to ask for help? Michael Jordan, a man used to facing challenges on and off the court, found himself in a moment that would test not just his generosity, but his humanity. On a freezing night in Chicago, a simple question from a homeless girl would lead to an unexpected connection, one that neither of them could have ever predicted. Keep reading. This heartwarming encounter is about to change everything you thought you knew about kindness. The Cold Night and the Silent Girl. The night air was sharp, slicing through the streets of Chicago like an unseen blade. It was a bone-chilling winter evening where the cold seeped deep into your skin, no matter how many layers you wore. The city was quieter than usual, its usual hustle muffled by the thick layers of frost that clung to the world. The faint glow of neon lights from Bill's Diner shimmered through the haze of the night, offering a brief reprieve from the biting cold. Inside, the warm scent of coffee and sizzling burgers wrapped around Michael Jordan like a comforting blanket. It was a familiar scene, the kind he'd known for years, a simple meal after a quiet evening with friends. But as he stepped outside, holding a to-go container with the remnants of his dinner, the city's usual rhythm suddenly shifted. As he walked toward his car, something caught his eye. Just outside the door, near the edge of the parking lot, stood a small figure. She was barely visible in the shadows, a solitary child in an oversized coat that hung off her like a tent, the sleeves swallowing her hands. The red glow from the diner's neon sign cast a faint light across her face, revealing a young girl, no more than 10 years old. Her cheeks were raw from the cold, her face streaked with dirt. Her eyes, though, were the most haunting part of her. They were fixed on the food in his hand, not in a desperate, begging way, but with a quiet, almost invisible yearning. She wasn't calling out, she wasn't asking for pity, she was simply waiting, standing still in the dark like a shadow, hoping someone would notice. A chill ran down Michael's spine. There was something in those eyes, something that spoke volumes without a single word. A kind of vulnerability that seemed to echo in the silence of the night. Michael could have turned away, he could have rationalized it away, as so many people do. I don't have time, someone else will help her, or perhaps she's not really hungry. But as he stood there, just feet away from this small, invisible child, he felt something inside him stir. The warmth of the diner seemed to grow colder in comparison to the rawness of the moment. He didn't need to know her story to understand that she was more than just a girl standing in the cold. She was a person, a young soul quietly asking for help in a world that had overlooked her for too long. The unlikely encounter. In the quiet stillness of that moment, Michael's gaze lingered on the little girl. There was something about her that pulled at him, a weight in the air that seemed to demand attention. She wasn't crying, she wasn't begging. She was simply standing there, caught in a limbo between hope and hesitation, her small frame swallowed by the cold. Michael stood frozen himself, the cold from the air mixing with the warmth of his meal in his hands. It was a strange moment, a rare one, the kind that feels as if time has paused, leaving the world suspended between what was and what could be. And it was in that silence, in that space, that Michael knew he could no longer walk away. He took a step forward, closing the distance between them, feeling the weight of every second tick by. It wasn't just about handing over his leftover sandwich. It was about something far more profound. It was about looking someone in the eye, seeing the vulnerability in their gaze and responding with more than just sympathy. It was about seeing them as a person, not as an anonymous figure standing on the fringes of society. The girl didn't flinch when he approached, but she didn't make any move toward him either. She simply stood there, her fingers clenched tightly around the straps of her worn-out backpack, eyes fixed on the food he held. As Michael got closer, he noticed the faint tremor in her hands, a subtle sign that the cold had found its way into her bones, and the quiet loneliness that seemed to echo from her posture. When their eyes finally met, Michael saw the hesitation in hers. There was a depth to those eyes, a kind of guarded trust, as though she had learned long ago that asking for help didn't always guarantee it. It was a trust that had been broken too many times, a part of her soul that had grown wary from the world's indifference. Michael didn't immediately offer her the food. Instead, he knelt down to her level, ensuring that they were eye to eye. There was something in that simple act, a way of saying without words that she mattered, that she was seen, that she wasn't just another face in the crowd lost to the world's cold apathy. He understood that this wasn't just about filling an empty stomach. It was about restoring a shred of dignity, about reminding her that she was more than her circumstances. "What's your name?" Michael asked, his voice calm and soft, like he had all the time in the world to listen. For a moment the girl hesitated, shifting her weight from one foot to the other, her small body bracing against the wind. Then, in a voice so faint it was barely audible, she whispered, "Emily." Michael nodded, his expression gentle. "Have you eaten today, Emily?" The girl's shoulders lifted in a subtle shrug, her gaze dropping to the cold ground beneath her. It was clear that she didn't want to admit the truth, that hunger had become her constant companion, a quiet presence that lingered in the shadows of her existence. But Michael didn't press her. Instead, he offered her the space to speak when she was ready. A step beyond giving food. As Michael stood there, holding the container of food, something inside him shifted. This wasn't just about offering her the sandwich and walking away. It couldn't be. Michael had seen too much, known too many stories of how people passed through life unnoticed, discarded by the world's indifference. He knew that kindness, while important, could sometimes feel hollow if it wasn't backed by something deeper. What Emily needed wasn't just a quick fix. It was the chance to feel human again, to feel as though her existence mattered, to be seen beyond the hunger in her eyes. Instead of simply handing over the meal and turning to walk away, Michael made a choice. He lowered the container slowly, taking a moment to breathe in the cold air, feeling the weight of the decision. This wasn't just about giving food, it was about something far more significant. It was about offering her dignity, respect, and, perhaps most of all, a sense of safety in a world that had shown her little of either. He crouched down to her level. The movement wasn't quick but purposeful, a deliberate act to break the distance between them both physically and emotionally. In that moment, he wasn't just a stranger passing by, he was a man who saw her, a man who was willing to be present, fully present, in her moment of need. The simple act of crouching sent a message. "I'm here, not just for your food, but for you. You are not invisible. You are not alone." Michael's gaze met hers, and for the first time since he had noticed her, she looked up at him. The girl's eyes were wide with uncertainty, but there was something else in them too, a glimmer of hope, fragile and tentative, as though she was unsure whether she could believe in it. The walls around her heart were high, built over years of disappointment, rejection, and survival, but for a brief moment she allowed herself to trust the person standing before her. "What's your name?" Michael asked softly, his voice calm and steady, as though he had all the time in the world to listen. There was no rush, no urgency, just a quiet invitation to connect. The girl hesitated, as if the question had caught her off guard. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, her small body wrapped tightly in layers of clothing, her backpack still clutched in her hands. Then, after a long pause, she finally spoke. "Emily," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael smiled gently, nodding. "Nice to meet you, Emily. Have you eaten today?" Her eyes flickered down to the ground, and she shrugged, her shoulders pulling up in a small, defeated gesture. Michael could tell that her pride, what little she had left, kept her from saying the truth, that she hadn't eaten in far too long. He didn't need her to admit it. The hunger was written all over her face, in the way she held her small body so tightly, in the tremor of her hands as she gripped her backpack straps. "Come on," Michael said after a moment, his tone still soft yet firm with a quiet determination. "Let's get you something fresh. I'll take you inside." Emily hesitated, her wide eyes darting back and forth, looking for a sign that this was really happening. She wasn't used to this. The kindness, the warmth. The world she knew didn't work this way. People didn't just give without expecting something in return. But Michael wasn't offering charity. He was offering something far more valuable, the chance to feel human again, to experience a moment where kindness wasn't transactional, but simply an act of seeing someone for who they truly were. Michael didn't rush her. He simply held the door open, letting the warmth of the diner spill out into the night air. For a moment, Emily just stood there, her small frame unsure of whether she had permission to step into the warmth, whether she deserved it. But slowly, tentatively, she stepped forward, the cold night still clinging to her as she crossed the threshold. As they walked into the diner, the warmth was almost overwhelming to Emily. The heat wrapped around her, the scent of freshly grilled food and hot coffee filling her senses. For a brief moment she stood still, absorbing the contrast. It was as if she had stepped into another world, one where people didn't have to struggle for survival, one where warmth and comfort were as easy to come by as a meal. The truth behind Emily's struggles. As they sat there, the soft clatter of plates and the hum of conversations around them created a kind of barrier between Emily and the world. It was a strange sense of quiet, a silence that lingered between them as they ate. The moment, however, wasn't lost on Michael. He could feel the weight of the silence, the unsaid words that hung in the air, the heaviness that seemed to sit on Emily's small shoulders. She wasn't just hungry for food, she was starving for a sense of belonging, for a glimpse of hope, for a life that didn't revolve around survival. When the waitress placed the burger and fries in front of Emily, it was as if time slowed down. Emily didn't wait. She picked up the burger with both hands and took a bite, chewing quickly, almost as if she feared the food might disappear if she didn't finish it fast enough. The hunger was there, raw and undeniable. But so was something else, a deep, underlying sadness. Michael could see it in the way she ate, the speed at which she consumed the meal, as if she were trying to fill a void much bigger than just her empty stomach. For a moment, Michael just watched her, allowing her the space to eat. He could tell she wasn't used to this, to sitting in a diner, to having someone offer her more than a scrap or a leftover. It wasn't just the food, it was the kindness, the normalcy of it, the simple act of being treated like a human being instead of someone invisible. She had been unseen for so long that, for a brief moment, Michael wondered if she even knew how to accept the basic act of care. As Emily took a sip of her chocolate milk, the tension in her shoulders seemed to ease slightly. It wasn't much, but it was something. After a few moments of silence, she set her glass down and looked up at Michael. Her voice was quiet, almost hesitant, as if she wasn't sure how to ask what she truly wanted to know. "Were you helping me?" she asked, her eyes searching his face for an answer. Michael took a slow breath, considering his words carefully. He knew this wasn't just about the meal. It was about something deeper, something that was almost impossible to put into words. It was about restoring a piece of her humanity, about showing her that someone cared, not out of pity, but out of a genuine desire to help. "Because you asked," Michael said simply. "Most people want to help, they just don't know how." Emily looked at him, her eyes still uncertain, but there was something softer in them now, something that resembled hope, though it was fragile. She chewed on her lip, thinking, as if trying to understand that simple answer. It wasn't just about the food, the act of giving. It was about the fact that she had been seen, heard, and valued, for the first time in what must have felt like a lifetime. The silence stretched on, but it wasn't as heavy as before. Emily was still absorbing the gravity of the moment, as though she were weighing the possibility that this act of kindness might be more than just a brief encounter. Michael watched her closely, understanding that for someone who had been through as much as she had, trust didn't come easily. She had learned to shield herself, to protect the small part of her heart that still longed for something better. "Where's your mom?" Michael asked gently, his voice low, as if to invite her to share if she was ready. Emily froze for a moment. Her eyes flickered to her plate, then to the window, before finally lowering her gaze to her hands, which were tightly clasped around her napkin. "She's at the shelter," Emily replied, her voice steady but tight with emotion. Michael nodded, giving her the time and space to continue. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was a moment of understanding, one that spoke volumes without words. As Emily stared at the table, Michael could see the weariness in her eyes. It wasn't just physical exhaustion, though that was certainly present. It was an exhaustion of the spirit, the kind that comes from never knowing where the next meal will come from or where you'll sleep that night. He had seen that kind of weariness before, in the faces of people who had spent too much of their lives fighting battles they didn't deserve. "How long have you been staying at the shelter?" Michael asked softly, not wanting to push, but feeling the need to understand. "A while," Emily answered, her voice almost matter-of-fact, but there was a certain heaviness in the way she spoke, as though she had learned to live with the weight of uncertainty. She wasn't just living day to day, she was surviving, learning to hold on to whatever small pieces of hope she could. But Michael could see it in her eyes. She had already begun to accept that life might never get better. It broke his heart to see it. No 10-year-old should ever have to carry that kind of weight. A new beginning? The meal was nearing its end, but the silence between Michael and Emily lingered. Emily had slowed her eating, taking her time with the last few fries. Her eyes were cast downward, her fingers tracing the edge of her napkin as though she were lost in thought. Michael watched her carefully, noticing how she had begun to relax, the tightness in her shoulders easing slightly, the guardedness in her posture softening. But beneath that calm, Michael could feel the quiet weight of something deeper, something unspoken. Emily was afraid. Not of the food, not of the kindness, but of what it meant. Michael could sense the reluctance in her. It wasn't because she wasn't grateful. He could see the faintest spark of gratitude in the way her fingers lingered on her plate. But it was as if she had learned over the years to accept only what was necessary, what was bare minimum, and anything more than that made her feel vulnerable. She had lived in a world where nothing came for free, where every good thing had its strings attached. Hope, for Emily, had become something fleeting, something she couldn't afford to hold on to for too long. "You're lucky," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Most people don't help, they just walk away." Michael paused, letting her words sink in. He could see that she didn't just mean that about the food. She was speaking of something much larger, something deeper than the meal they had shared. It was about people who had turned their backs, about the isolation that came with being invisible to society. Emily had been failed by so many, and it had led her to build walls around her heart. Trust, once lost, was hard to reclaim, and she wasn't sure if she could afford to hope for anything more. "But I'm not like most people," Michael said softly, his voice steady and calm. "I want to help, and I'm not asking for anything in return." For a long moment Emily said nothing. She chewed on her lip, her gaze fixed on the table. Michael could see the battle in her eyes, the war between the child who longed for something more and the survivor who had learned to protect herself from getting hurt. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that this was real, that there were people in the world who didn't just help because it was expected of them, but because they genuinely cared. "Why?" Emily finally asked, her voice almost inaudible, but the question held the weight of a lifetime. "Why do you want to help me?" Michael leaned forward, his eyes meeting hers with a depth that spoke volumes. He understood what she was asking. This wasn't just about food. This was about belief. Belief in herself. Belief that someone cared enough to make a difference. Belief that things could change. But what Emily needed more than anything was a glimpse of hope, something to hold on to when everything around her had seemed so uncertain. "Because someone cared about me once," Michael said, his voice low, carrying the weight of his own experiences. "And it changed my life." Emily's eyes widened, her curiosity piqued. For the first time in the conversation, she looked up fully, meeting his gaze with a kind of tentative wonder. She was beginning to see that this wasn't just about charity. It was about something more profound, a moment of human connection, a gesture of kindness that could offer her more than just a meal. It could offer her a chance for something different, something better. Michael's words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. He wasn't just offering her food, he was offering her a lifeline. It was a lifeline not made of promises, not made of guarantees, but of something far more powerful, the knowledge that someone saw her, cared for her, and was willing to help her take the first steps toward something new. He could see the uncertainty in her eyes, the hesitation that still lingered, but he also saw a flicker of something else, something he hadn't seen before. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was there. It was the glimmer of hope. "Do you want to know where I can help you get more than just a meal?" Michael asked gently. Emily didn't answer immediately. She looked at the empty plate in front of her, then at the window, her eyes scanning the outside world. She was thinking, weighing her options, wondering if this was real. She had learned to protect herself from the cruelty of the world, but maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to believe that there was more for her than just survival. "I'll take you there," Michael said, offering her the number of the nonprofit that had helped him in the past, a place where families like hers could get support. "I don't want you to just survive. I want you to thrive." As he handed her the number, Michael could feel something shift. It wasn't a grand transformation, nor was it a dramatic moment, but there was a quiet change, a softening in Emily's heart. She had been given a glimpse of something she hadn't dared to believe in for a long time. The possibility of change. The possibility of a better future. "I'll think about it," Emily said, her voice a little stronger than before, though still uncertain. That was all Michael needed to hear. The rest he knew would come in time. A new beginning? As Michael sat across from Emily, watching her carefully, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. She wasn't just a hungry child in need of a meal. She was a soul scarred by circumstances beyond her control. A young girl who had learned to survive in a world that had never shown her mercy. And though he had offered her food, something told him that what she truly needed wasn't just nourishment for her body, but for her spirit. Michael knew that offering a meal, while important, was just the beginning. This wasn't a quick fix. It wasn't a one-time gesture of kindness. No, it was about providing Emily with the possibility of something different. A new way of thinking, of living, of seeing herself. It was about giving her a moment of respite from the harsh reality she had known for so long, a moment where she could imagine a life where she wasn't just surviving, but thriving. "And so," he gently continued, "Emily," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "this isn't just about this meal. This is about you knowing that you don't have to face this world alone. There are people who care, people who want to help you, not because it's their job, but because they believe in you." For a long moment, Emily didn't respond. She simply stared at the plate in front of her, her small hands gripping the napkin as if it were the only thing anchoring her to the present. Michael knew that this moment was fragile. He couldn't rush her, couldn't force her to believe in what he was offering, but he could offer her something priceless, the space to see the possibility of a future beyond what she had known, to offer a glimpse of hope that things could change. "I don't have much," Michael continued, his voice softening, "but I do know where you can find help, a place where they can help you and your mom get back on your feet. They provide housing, work, support, a real chance." Emily's gaze flickered up to meet his, her expression cautious. She wasn't used to promises, not used to people offering help without expecting something in return, but Michael wasn't asking for anything. He wasn't looking for thanks or praise. He was simply offering her a chance to believe that things could be different. "Do you want to go?" Michael asked, his words simple but meaningful. "I'll take you there. I'll make sure they help you." For a brief second, Emily's face softened, and Michael could see the weight of the world in her eyes. She wasn't just considering the offer, she was considering her own future, a future that had always seemed out of reach. For the first time, Emily allowed herself to imagine a life where she didn't have to carry the burden of survival alone, a life where she could ask for help and actually receive it. But then, as quickly as the softness came, it faded. The walls she had spent so long building around herself came back up. She hesitated, looking down again at the table, her fingers fidgeting with her napkin. The world she knew was one of uncertainty. She had learned to trust only herself, to depend on nothing but her own will to survive. Trusting others, believing that people would help without expecting something in return, was a leap she wasn't sure she could take. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What if it doesn't work? What if I don't fit in there?" Michael sat back, allowing her the space to process. He understood. This wasn't an easy decision. Emily had been let down by the world so many times before. She had learned to keep her heart guarded, to protect herself from the harsh realities of life. But Michael knew that in order for her to move forward, she had to take that leap, even if it was small, even if it was tentative. "Emily," Michael said gently, his eyes steady and sincere, "nothing is going to change if you don't try. Sometimes the hardest part is taking that first step, but you don't have to take it alone. I'll be there with you every step of the way." For the first time in the conversation, Emily looked up at him with something that resembled hope. It wasn't a bright, confident hope. It was a fragile, tentative hope. The kind that only comes when you've been broken down and are finally willing to let someone help rebuild you. "Okay," she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. "I'll try." That was all Michael needed to hear. He didn't expect her to have all the answers, to suddenly feel confident or sure of the decision, but she had taken the first step, the hardest one, and that was enough. Emily's journey may have just begun, but her story is one that resonates with so many of us. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can spark the biggest changes, and it all starts with someone who believes in you, even when you can't believe. If Emily's story touched your heart, don't let it stop here. Join us in spreading kindness and hope by subscribing to our channel. We share stories that inspire, uplift, and remind us that no act of compassion is ever too. Have you ever been in a moment where someone's kindness changed your life? Or perhaps you've witnessed a random act of compassion that made a difference? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Together, let's keep the conversation going and build a community. Subscribe now to